and welcome to the SDG Roundtable. The Sustainable Development Goals are our global blueprint for a better future. We like to call them the world's to-do list. From ending hunger to ensuring every child has the education and tools needed to succeed in an increasingly complex world. We are meeting today in the lead-up to the SDG Moment, an annual event at the United Nations convened by the Secretary-General to take stock of our shared progress in delivering solutions at the scale needed to lift everyone, everywhere. And there is a new urgency. In every part of the world, countries and communities are grappling with the impact of a triple crisis: conflicts, COVID, and of course, climate change. My name is Sherwin Bryce-Pease. And joining me today are 4 UN leaders working on the SDGs who are at the heart of a more coherent and well-coordinated UN development system. Helena Fraser, Director of Policy and Program at the UN Coordination Office, who is joining us in studio today. Helena, good to see you. Amanda Kosi Mukwashi, UN Resident Coordinator in Lesotho. Didier Trebuk, UN Resident Coordinator for Barbados and Eastern Caribbean, Dominica, Grenada and Antigua. And Rolly Ashtana, UN Resident Coordinator in Uzbekistan. Welcome to you all. We know about the challenges. Let's get into the solutions. Let's start with you, Rolly Ashtana. Uzbekistan is going through a social transformation for the SDGs. Can you tell us a bit about this transformation? What are the solutions to close what many view as the widening gaps?
Thank you for the question. I've been here in Uzbekistan for 6 months, and in my half the year here, I've traveled extensively to half the regions of Uzbekistan. This is a country, a fascinating country at a fascinating time, which is going through political, economic, and social transformation, all of which are very closely related. I'll highlight 3 things in social transformation: youth, gender, and communities and civil society. And it's a very young country. Of the 35 million population of Uzbekistan, 60% are under 30, a quarter are under 18. Maybe about 1 million babies will be born just this year. So this is a country where we are helping the state at every level to provide education, skills, and create job opportunities for this fast expanding young population. Gender is a big issue. It's the transformation is happening at many levels. Women's leadership is consciously being addressed, but there are cultural norms that threaten to leave women behind the fast economic progress. And again, that is something that we in the UN here are very consciously addressing. And finally, regional inequality, rural communities, remote communities being left behind, or minorities risk being excluded. And we work very closely with civil society to make sure that no one is left behind.
I'll agree with you there, Rolly. The gender inequality and women's empowerment probably a cross-cutting issues in terms of the gaps that still remain, whether in Uzbekistan or across regions. Let's bring in Didier Trebuk. Caribbean countries are further away from achieving the SDGs due to the impact of the external shocks like climate change and, of course, limited fiscal space. Help us, Didier, understand how the UN is collaborating with Eastern Caribbean countries to accelerate the SDGs.
And greetings from Kingston in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. As you know, I cover 10 countries and territory here. But first, you mentioned climate change. And as Prime Minister Mia Mottley stressed, it's not a mere change that we are dealing with. It's truly a climate crisis that we're experiencing every day in small island developing states and in this region. And following several natural disasters, volcanic eruption last year again here in St. Vincent, the COVID pandemic, now the triple crisis on food, energy, and finance, countries are really starting to lag behind on several global goals. So in a way, we have no time to lose because it's now a matter of life and death. And building resilience, we feel, is really about bulletproofing the people of the Caribbean. So my main first message would be let's avoid post-mortem responses. Let's prevent, and let's invest also in people's resilience. Now, I'd like to give you some of the example of what we're doing as UN team in a collaborative manner. For example, we just helped Dominica and Grenada to take stock of their sustainable development progress through their voluntary national report this year. We are now also supporting Barbados and Antigua and Barbuda to map their progress on SDGs and elaborate a roadmap to accelerate implementation on some key goals where they could be lagging behind. We're also supporting 3 countries identify the financial needs for blue economy, and that would help them cover the financing gaps to build resilience, also unlock economic growth in those small states, but large ocean states in the end. So these are very, very powerful instruments to build momentum and also catalyze partnerships. But let me turn to the Caribbean Safe School initiative that is supported by UN Disaster Risk Reduction and UNICEF. And it really helps to minimize disruption in education in case of shocks through disaster-resistant infrastructure. But for example, it also focuses on resilient education, and they have fully digitalized all the curriculum from kindergarten to grade 12. And this is really a great example of doing work at scale across the region. PAHO, WHO, have also retrofitted more than 50 smart hospitals to ensure that they're resilient to climate change, green certified, while also improving access to quality health care. I think we all remember also the Irma and Maria hurricanes in 2017 in Dominica. And that's a country where agencies like IOM, UNDP helped rebuild houses and roofs of around 5% of all the households to become compliant with housing standards. Standards that we helped also develop as legislation. So this ensures the protection of the assets of those families mostly vulnerable from future Category 5 hurricanes.
I'm glad you mentioned Prime Minister Mia Mottley, of course, one of the stars, Didier, in terms of what political leadership looks like when we talk about the SDGs. I also like that quote, let's avoid post-mortem responses, let's prevent. And probably a good segue in bringing in the resident coordinator in Lesotho, Amanda Kosi Mukwashi. Lesotho recently presented its second voluntary national review at the high-level political forum. Some of the key findings point to the fact that economic disruptions caused by COVID-19 led to a loss of wages for many households, thus reversing poverty reduction gains and making achieving the SDGs that much more challenging by 2030. Of course, not unique to Lesotho, right? So what is the required urgent action for Lesotho in addressing these challenges and delivering transformative change?
Good evening, and thank you very much for that question. As you know, Lesotho has a very small population. We're talking about a country that has about 2.2 million people. Of those 2.2 million people, 70% live in rural areas. And this is quite a significant thing. Healthy land is so vital for the nation as it can keep people out of poverty, it can provide employment, it can be a source of food security. So I just wanted to really point that out. An estimation of about 66% of households in Lesotho live on degraded land. The main drivers of land degradation include things like poor agriculture, poor land management practices, burning of rangelands, deforestation, and climate change-induced impacts. Now, in terms of urgent action, the government has been working, the communities have been working. But although the government has adopted policies of climate smart and resilient environmental management, what we're seeing is that there is a general lack of implementation and adherence to environmental management plans and regulations. I'll give you an example, of what the community is doing. I recently visited some UN-supported projects in 2 of the districts, tackling issues of poverty, of migration, of food insecurity, and unemployment. One of these projects was on socio-economic integration of returned migrants. Basotho, returning from South Africa due to job losses, together with the community, decided that, you know what? They wanted hunger alleviation and income-generating initiatives that would feed them and provide employment for young people. This community started greenhouse agriculture projects. In just a year, they are reaping the benefits, accessing markets and selling their produce. For me, this is really inspiring. The oversight is led by a 70-year-old resilient woman who is very passionate about transferring her traditional agriculture knowledge to the younger generation. Why is this so critical for us? Because communities have to sit right at the heart of any urgent action that we are going to take in the Kingdom of Lesotho. The UN have supported the government in reversing land degradation. Lesotho also has a dedicated ministry responsible for range and soil conservation. But my last point to you, which really excites me, is an organization called Renoka. Renoka means we are a river, and it is a national program and an active citizen movement to advance integrated catchment management in Lesotho. Citizen engagement and commitment is what is helping the country to move from policy to implementation.
Well, I'll say this, Amanda. One takeaway from that response is that grandmothers can lead, right? Helena, let's bring you in. Last but not least, right? The question of implementation is a cross-cutting issue across the SDGs, all 17 of them, and I imagine this resonates very much with you. You oversee the Development Coordination Office at a global level. With the progress that has been made, the challenges still are great, right? Where do you see the largest gaps in terms of achieving the SDGs, and what solutions need to be put in place to turbocharge these?
Well, thanks for that. And I think what we've heard just now from my colleagues illustrates beautifully the great complexity of the challenge in the road to achieving the SDGs, but also the diversity and frankly inspiring action that colleagues on the ground in the UN are taking to address them. We're really at a point today, and my colleagues have touched on this, where we need to rescue the SDGs. And there are 4 clear gap areas that we're sitting at global level where we need to take action. The first is accelerating the recovery from COVID-19. Mm-hmm. The second is tackling this growing crisis on food, fuel, and finance. The third is really investing in people through education and social protection, restoring our human capital and making it fit for purpose in the 21st century and beyond. And then fourthly, of course, and all my colleagues have alluded to this, it's climate action. The critical question is, how do we do this in a world that's besieged by complex uncertainty? And I think the beauty of Agenda 2030 is that it provides this very clear and universal roadmap about investing in people, about fostering partnerships, scaling innovation, addressing how to protect our planet in a more risk-oriented and effective collaborative way. We're looking for fostering economies which are inclusive, equitable, sustainable, resilient, and we're looking to prevent conflict, prevent crises, and prevent climate catastrophe.
Are you sensing, though, Helena, the urgency that is required for this moment, right? We've had the COVID-19 pandemic. We're seeing the catastrophe that climate change represents. Add on to that, conflicts, external shocks. You talk about, the reconfiguring of how development financing works in the world. You have had this blueprint called the SDGs since 2015, and yet we're sort of, teetering on the edge while Rome burns.
I think you've heard the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General sound the alarm. They have made clarion calls in every forum, in every summit, and we will hear more of that later this week. I think it's vital, really vital, that civil society mobilizes behind that clarion call. Private sector, businesses, academia, governments are not moving as fast as we would like, and the Secretary General has been very clear on that. But this has to be a coalition of everyone. We're seeing amazing action by mayors in big city on climate action in countries where, there is not such great federal global action that we would like to see. And it's really important, bringing along young people around the world, bringing along students, bringing along,
An all-of-society approach.
Yes, a whole-of-society approach. And I think, yes, Rome is burning, as it were. But yes, I see seeds of hope everywhere. I hear it from my colleagues, the partnerships that they're launching, the incredible action that they're taking. Is it enough? No. But it is the seeds of hope. It is the seeds of transformation. And what we're calling for today and every day is to mobilize behind that.
And of course, we're not just referring to the Italians when we talk about Rome burning. And to quote the Secretary General at the high-level political forum, the ECOSOC high-level political forum on the SDGs in July, our world is in deep trouble, and so are the Sustainable Development Goals. Amanda Kosi-Mukwashi, let's bring you back in. COVID-19 has, of course, exacerbated gender inequalities in Lesotho and everywhere, in every country around the world, really. And this is quite concerning. What solutions are being put in place to mitigate the negative impact on women and girls?
Thank you. This is a subject that is really close to my heart. And just building on what Helena was saying, the SDGs are for the women and girls in Lesotho a lighthouse. They're a lighthouse that points us to a life of dignity and right. We know that we have thrived when we get there. Let me tell you something. On Monday, the 29th of August, last month, a young girl of 14 years old was on her way to school when she was attacked, raped, and murdered. And this young girl is not just one story. No. This story is not unique. It is very common, unfortunately, here in Lesotho. Recent data states that 44% of inmates in prisons are sexual offenders, with some prisons accounting for up to 71% in places like Mohalishoek. A recent Commonwealth study states that GBV costs the government at least 5.5% of GDP. In a recent survey by the Afrobarometer this year, a few months ago, 64% of Lesotho see GBV as the most important women's rights issue that the government and society must address. The country has tried, I have to say, they've tried to make some progress to address the GBV crisis, but it remains pervasive in places like the domestic sphere, in institutions, in communities, and at a broader societal level. But there is a momentum being led by the government with support of the UN. In July this year, the Ministry of Gender, together with the United Nations, convened a big anti-gender-based violence forum that brought together stakeholders. And I have to say, stakeholders from across the divide, because this was really key, because this is a societal issue. So government, civil society, the private sector, the church, the security sector, and the international development community. The forum recognized that the crisis requires a whole societal approach to stop what has become a painful way of life and a major threat to achieving the SDGs. Partnerships with different stakeholders will be essential. We are very encouraged by the engagement of the private sector, partnering with the UN to find long-lasting solutions. And in particular, we have seen that this actually happens, and it happens successfully. We have seen that UNICEF, for example, has been able to do so, secure $2.5 million under the Global Partnership for Education. This model, I believe, could well serve the fight against gender-based violence.
Rolly, we hear about a new Vision 2030 multi-partner trust fund being established in Uzbekistan. Can you tell us about that and how it might inform other country missions of the UN?
Thank you. Yes, this is quite an exciting time for us. Just 3 weeks ago, the governments of Uzbekistan and Switzerland signed in Bern a bilateral agreement which will restitute confiscated, illegally acquired funds which are going through the court process back to the people of Uzbekistan. So, to be clear, these are funds that were stolen from the people of Uzbekistan, and they're coming back to the people of Uzbekistan. This is, as to my knowledge, the biggest restitution of its kind and of its size. But the most unique thing about it is that I think for the first time it is coming back to a UN multi-partner trust fund, which is underpinning this document, the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework 2021 to 25, and which the whole of the UN family, which in Uzbekistan comprises of 25 funds, agencies, and programs, will work on together in order to achieve transformational impact at scale. And you've talked about the Vision 2030 Fund. Our vision actually is to give it an Uzbek name, it's an Uzbek, a beautiful Uzbek word called ishonch, which means trust. It literally means trust, and it really is not just about economic growth or social change, but it really is about building trust between the state and the population, and the social contract between us, the international organizations who are trying to work here in support of the Uzbek people, between civil society in this very fast transforming country. And just to link this back to the first question that you'd asked me about social transformation, there are examples already of great work that agencies have done here, which achieve this kind of example of interlinked transformation. One recent success was the near eradication of systemic child and forced labor from cotton cultivation in Uzbekistan, which had Uzbekistan on the banned list for cotton exports in the world. Now, ILO and the World Bank and other agencies have helped Uzbekistan get off the banned list. This is going to have a transformational economic impact, obviously a social impact, and it's also a major human rights victory.
I quite enjoyed when you talked about giving it an Uzbek name, right? Localizing these ideas, these challenges, this content is very, very important. In 30 seconds, Rolly, do you agree?
I absolutely agree. This has to be owned. This has to be absolutely, the people of Uzbekistan really need to feel ownership of it, and they need to have the confidence that we in the UN are working for their benefit in partnership with their government, but also with their civil society and with civil society internationally as well.
Didier Truebuk, you've been quiet for a while. As resident coordinator, you are tasked with leading the UN team to help small island developing states to respond to the multiple crises they face, while at the same time build resilience and the empowerment of people to rebuild stronger communities. How is the UN system helping countries to leave no one behind and address the needs of the most vulnerable?
Yes, well, first I can say that building resilience requires, I think, investing both in the built environment, but also in the people. And as you rightly say, in the region facing multiple crises, multiple hazards, the UN has been taking a multidimensional approach with the needs always of the most vulnerable, such as women, youth, elderly, and other segments of the society, really central to our efforts. For example, in St. Lucia, we could expand the coverage of households by 40% at the time they most needed it. So this is for this reason that as a UN team, we are working with the governments to boost innovative financing. And that includes working with partners like the Caribbean Development Bank or the private sector. So youth can access capital as entrepreneurs, and that's very often the problem they face. A view protecting and empowering the most vulnerable, such as women and youth, is extremely critical if we're serious about achieving the Agenda 2030 and, of course, building resilience to climate change.
Okay, well, thank you again to this panel for sharing your reflections and giving us some inspiration. But before we close, I would like to go around and invite each of you to share one word that you are going into this SDG moment with. Let's start here in studio. Helena Fraser.
Aspiration and ambition.
Aspiration and ambition. 2 for 1. Thanks, Helena. Amanda Kosi Mukwashi in Lesotho. Your one word, please.
I think it has to be whole of society.
One word, Amanda.
Everything that we do. Well, it's hyphened, isn't it? A whole of society with a bit of one. Yeah?
Got you, yeah. Thank you. We'll yes. Hyphenate it. That's Helena's suggestion. Rolly Astana.
Well, I think it's got to be ishonch, trust. It's going to be all about building trust in the process, trust among the people, and trust that we will achieve the aspiration and the ambition that Helena just talked about.
Didier will give you the final word, literally.
My word will be action, but action with inclusion. That's how we can make a difference.
Aspiration, one, trust, action, inclusion, and maybe a few more. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. And as we look forward to the SDG moment, we hope that you will take with you these hopeful solutions and help us to activate to achieve the SDGs.